All right, you guys. Well, it's great to be back with you. Jeff asked me to talk about it's that time of year to really think about adding and shooting texture in your images. And I love to talk about this. It's the best time of year to get started. And it's really interesting. I had a love for discovering textures and working through that in my photography a few years back. And as I started reading and studying, I realized it actually is a genre of photography. So I'm going to share with you some of my learnings along the way and some ways to think about it. Okay. So we'll jump right in. So when you think about textures, it's more than just, it's the fine details, but these details are what really evoke emotions. And texture is defined as the tactile quality of a surface, of course. So it's how it feels if it's touched. But there's so much more than that. And that's what we're going to explore first. So throughout, I'll have some of my images that, part of the story is the texture as much as it is whatever the subject is. And I'm going to ask if we can get everyone on mute, and then I will pause throughout for questions. Just so there's not that making me think that it's my Wi-Fi. So, if you look outside your window or you're in your backyard or walking down the street, even though you can't maybe touch something, it's out of your reach, you can see the layers of textures. If you think about an oak tree, if you think about a maple tree right now and a really large tree. We have some huge pine trees out here in Maryland. And, if you just think about how that feels and how it smells, but imagine if we didn't have that texture. So it's an element of art, and it can enhance what you're trying to express, and it can also be the subject. So I think that's what's really interesting. Texture draws us in, and it really enables us to spend more time with the work, whether it's an artist piece that's maybe a sculpture or an oil painting. We spend more time, and oil painters, if you think about it, they spend so much time adding layers. So they start, and if any of you paint, especially with oil, you start with a really rough sketch and you layer and layer and layer to build up that three-dimensional quality and the texture. And it's the same thing that we can express in our photography. We just have to think about it a little bit differently. So sometimes texture is thinking about, the grasses is an intentional camera movement. And so I used that creative style to express the texture in the grasses and also how they feel, the movement of those grass blades that could almost cut you. And then if you think about, this picture of this pine branch just holding the snow and the texture and how that feels, and maybe an emotion that it brings to mind or a feeling, if you think about when you see certain images, how they might make you feel or be reminiscent of something in your life or past. I love to think about texture and a juxtaposition with this beautiful light that was actually coming from these large blades of a palm type branch, and just getting that detail versus the softness. And of course, leaves are a great way to capture texture. And then again, thinking about the counterbalance to that, the softness and of this bokeh and light. A couple more images of texture. Now, this is a true kind of raw texture. And this was a old brick concrete walkway in Charleston, South Carolina. And I just loved the patterns and the color. And this is something that you can shoot as the subject. It's kind of like an abstract piece of art, or you could use it over another image to combine a lot of people like to add texture to their images, which we'll talk about later. This is a shot of the reflections on some water, and I just thought it really expressed how the light is moving and how you could just kind of feel and see that water movement as the ripples. This was after a boat had passed at a kind of a greenish pond in Charleston, South Carolina. Of course, lots of interesting texture there, and kind of the counterbalance again. So what specifically is texture photography? So when we think about just photography, it's about taking images that focus on the fine details of an object. So the image showcases visually how something feels. So it's connected to our sense of touch. Images with texture tell us something about the object. If it's fuzzy, rough, sharp, prickly, flat. So whether from nature or abstract, a photograph of texture evokes emotions. It can bring up associations of other times, of places, of things, of smells, of your sense of feelings and emotions, and maybe a sense of place or time. So, you know, it's more that when you see that texture and that detail, it's kind of what it makes you think about. And it can be any of the senses as you look at images of texture. So images showing texture engage the viewer. It feels tangible, accessible. So capturing texture really requires attention to detail. So if you think about trying to capture that small detail in a subject, but also trying to express how it feels, is really challenging. And I don't think I have at all mastered it. You would think that it would be easy, but patterns, colors, and components can have really great significance. So texture is actually conveyed by the patterns and the variations in light, shadows. All of those things make up, of course, the texture. When you think about shooting texture, the actual subject is less important. And this is where it can get challenging. So you may see a gorgeous fall tree, and the tree is really less important if you're wanting to shoot the texture. So you have to really think about and adjust your photography if you're just going to go out and really express and shoot texture. So here's some images from actually a winter walk. It was brutally cold, but I went out with some friends, and this was this image on the right was some ice coming over a dam, and I did a little bit of camera movement just to really express the colors. And to me, it expresses cold. Of course, I know where it was taken, but just the frozen quality. This was the light reflecting on some ice up here in the upper left, and then just some grasses that were kind of blowing. So capturing texture doesn't have to just be, you know, the lines of a leaf. It can also be really expressing what you're seeing, whether it's in nature or something that you might be doing at home in a studio. So let's talk a little bit about how to capture, and then I'll pause for some questions before I move on. So the great news about capturing texture, and I love to do texture workshops. I do have one coming up in October out at Brookside Gardens. It's my favorite time of year, late October, to go out there to shoot texture. They leave a lot of their plants and items out in the garden through the winter for the birds and animals. And so they're just amazing things to shoot for texture. So the great news is you can use any camera, you can shoot anytime, and really anywhere you can find textures. A tripod's not mandatory. It does help if you really want super sharp details, but it's not mandatory. I shot this image on a really blustery winter day, and these little leftover leaves were just crinkled up. And I did want it to be, there was a lot of soft winter light. I wanted it to look cold, but also express these textures. So you can choose to shoot anywhere in any aperture. Now, of course, if your goal is to really express, and again, I'll use a leaf, the lines and patterns of a leaf, you may want to be at f8, f11, f22 if needed. If you've got a faraway tree and you're trying to capture the lines of the bark, you may want that higher f-stop number. But you can also express texture, as I did with this image, shooting more wide open at 2.8 or f4. It really depends on what you're striving for. And so that's the flexibility. You're telling this story. Composition is still very critical. So we don't want to just capture snapshots. We want to really think about the lines, the patterns, getting as close as we can to express the texture in the image, not just the subject. Of course, light is critical in all photography, but light is going to help you bring out the texture and details. So backlighting is really, really fun to use because it will really enhance the subject. Side light, thinking about, again, where your light source is and how it's enhancing the texture. And you may need some extra light. So if you're bringing some things in for the winter to photograph texture, you may want some extra light, or even shooting on a light tracing pad, or having some studio light or flash can help. So texture can be your primary subject, and that's really what I want to encourage you to try. And I'm going to give you an exercise that you can do to really practice it. It can be your primary subject, or it can just be the details you want to showcase. So if you think about going out to, let's say, the Shenandoah, or you're going out to the Smoky Mountains and you're shooting a beautiful fall scene, you may decide to actually enhance your image and bring out all those beautiful textures in the leaves and the trees and make it a lot sharper and crisper to really showcase that. It doesn't have to be close up. Versus you could also shoot it and make it really soft and kind of dreamy with the morning fog and the smoky quality of the Smoky Mountains. So the sharpness of your image is essential in texture photography. So any unwanted motion blur can distort the texture. You can still choose to shoot at f2.8 or f4. You just want to think about what story you're trying to tell. And a lot of times when you're capturing textures, you are trying to shoot them where you get as much focus as possible and detail. So again, if you want that full detail, all across your image, you definitely want to use a tripod so that you don't have the movement. You can set your timer for a 2-second, 5-second timer, or use a handheld shutter so that you can trigger your camera and not have that shake. So that is absolutely an option if that's what you're looking for. You can also focus stack if you're familiar with that. So that can be where you're shooting multiple points of your image so that you get it all sharp. Light is going to be light. It shouldn't limit you from capturing textures, but you do need to think about how is the light bringing out those texture details that you want. And a straight picture of a texture might actually be boring. So if you just take a leaf and you just shoot it straight down, it might be interesting, but think about different angles of your composition. Think about moving around. And sometimes you might need to crop your image or flip it to really bring out the composition. And so, textures are not people or always landscape. Sometimes you're really narrowing in on that detail. And so you can add colors, you can saturate, you can convert to black and white. You can really play with them to bring out that detail that you want. You can also desaturate. So sometimes you may want to desaturate the other colors in the image and just leave the texture as the prominent. So a couple other ideas to consider is, again, thinking about patterns. What direction is the texture moving in? Thinking about your light and your contrast. If you're filling the frame, you don't typically want to use a wide angle lens because it can distort the pattern. So it's best to use something above a 24. Don't use something lower because you can get some distortion. So some creative options are using a light box or a light tracing pad and shooting your subject on there to really bring out the texture and details. And if you're not familiar with that, I do have an article on my website all about it. shooting on a light tracing pad. So it can be a great way to bring out details. You can also think about abstract. So many of my texture images are abstract. I like to just see something that has that texture and interest and captured in a really creative and more abstract way. And so you can do that. You can think about using backgrounds or scrapbook paper if you have a distracting background, because you want the subject to really stand out. And think outside the box. So think about things around your house to shoot. So you can get really creative. I've had students shoot fabric, sequins, thread, foil, all kinds of things to really capture texture or to even add those to their image. And also doing double exposure, multiple exposure can be really fun. And I'll give you some examples in a minute. So when you're thinking about capturing textures, it can be any type of photography. So as we've talked about, you can do abstract, you can do close-up macro, again, landscapes, garden scenes, intentional camera movement. Street photography is a great way to bring out textures. So this was a series. I have quite a large collection of leaf images. I love to capture them in really creative ways and to capture the detail of the texture and the light. And again, you'll notice a lot of patterns, movement. So I'm expressing, the subject of a simple leaf in some different ways. So it's creative, but it's also focusing on that texture and the lines. And it can really help with your composition when you think about the pattern and the lines that you're seeing, especially in nature. Now, capturing texture, again, focus stacking. So if you're really wanting the entire, this is a succulent plant, sharp in focus, the best and really only way to completely do that with a close-up subject is going to be to focus stack. You're going to want to use a tripod, and you're shooting all around the subject. So for this succulent, I shot multiple points. Usually I start and try to do kind of 4 points plus the center is my 5th. And then in some cases I go around where there's sharp sections and will continue to shoot. And then I'll put all of the images once I get them loaded and make sure there's no image that I need to delete. And I take those images and actually stack those in Photoshop. Now there's other programs like Helicon software and some others that do focus stacking. I have tried just about all of them, and I don't see a huge difference between them and Photoshop. And I'm much more comfortable using Photoshop, masking, bringing in the details, either myself or using the auto blend feature in Photoshop. The auto blend feature does a great job. And as long as you auto align your images first, it works really nicely. And I can absolutely answer any Photoshop questions about that if you have them at the end. So multiple exposure is another fun way. So I love to do this when I travel. So this is a scene across from Manhattan looking at New Jersey. And I was playing around with some multiple exposure. And so I actually shot, this was the ground, and I layered, this was the sidewalk, I layered it over the image, and it gave it just that, almost looks like it's snowing or raining. So it's a way to use texture in your images. And so anytime I look at this image, I remember standing there, what that sidewalk looked like, felt like, and it's just a way to add texture. Now, it's not that I'm expecting anyone else to know what this is, but it's just another way to incorporate texture into your photography. So this is another one where I intentionally shot this tree out of focus and then layered it over top of the in focus tree to just give it a real whimsical look and to really express just the beauty of its branches and the qualities of spring. So just something creative and different. And you've seen several images already using intentional camera movement. I think it's one of the best ways to express texture in a creative way. And a really big component of intentional camera movement is expressing the subject and getting those lines and movement. And it really does bring out textures. So this image on the left is from Glacier National Park, and it's where there was a forest fire many years ago, and it's starting to regrow. And I just felt it would be really beautiful captured with some intentional camera movement to still show the textures, but just a more abstract look. This image on the right is from some snow, and I actually overlaid a texture that I made with the trees. And oh, so sorry. Sorry about that, guys. And then this is an example of a shot. This was a water scene again. I love to do intentional camera movement in the water when there's movement in the water. It was just beautiful. This was really the true colors. I enhanced them, saturated them a little bit, but just gorgeous light. And I think it just really expresses water in a really creative way and shows it's really hard to express the texture of water and the movement, but intentional camera movement's a fun way to do that. So where to capture? Well, you can find textures anywhere and everywhere. Of course, at home, if you like to shoot food, kitchen gadgets, things around your house, furniture, you might have a piece of wood or metal. So, think about things around your home and you'll be surprised because textures, of course, are everywhere. Nature is pretty easy, and that's the given, and especially this time of year. There's so many things out in gardens, out in nature parks that have just gorgeous texture. Architecture is another fun one. So if you walk in any historic areas, so maybe you're in Old Town Alexandria, or you head out to Luckett's in Leesburg, or out here in Frederick, or wherever you might be, there's older buildings, or maybe newer buildings with shiny metal, paint, brick, stone. All of that can be beautiful. Thinking about junkyards, places that have antiques. Fabric, again, is really fun. I've had several students shoot incredible abstract images with fabric. And of course, just walking down your local street, you'd just be really surprised at how beautiful you can capture the water cover grates, gutters, paint, peeling paint. All those kinds of things can be really beautiful when you stop to think about how to capture them in a creative way. So before I talk about editing texture, let me make sure of what else. So I want to talk about editing for texture, but I'll pause and see if there are any questions just about how to shoot and what to look for when you're out and about.
Well, Lauren, when you're doing the focus stacking, so you pick points around the image rather than just go front to back at some interval. So you actually are selecting points that you're taking pictures of scattered around the image?
Yes. So if I was just out in a landscape scene, I would probably just do that, front, middle, back, and maybe something on the far left and far right, or a particular object. Maybe there's a boat in the water in front of the mountain or something like that. But if you're doing a macro close-up and you really want all those points on a flower or a leaf, then yes, I'm going to select multiple areas just to be safe, because there's been many times, especially with something like that succulent, where you would think the camera would get almost all of it with just maybe 4 or 5 points, but it just isn't always as crisp as you want. So there are several photographers that do a lot of texture photography and do focus stacking, and they will do 24, 36 or more micro shots all around the subject to get it really crisp.
Okay. I guess I also, when I think of trying to shoot texture, I think a lot about, side lighting to try to get real shadows and such. So do you use a lot of external, like room cubes or other sources of light to get dramatic lighting from the side?
Yeah, absolutely. So I have a flat panel LED light that mimics sunlight that I like to use. I'll shoot in front of a window in the winter. Um, I do sometimes use flash. I'm not a huge flash person, but I do pull it out every now and then. I don't primarily use it with texture. But yeah, so side light works great. Backlighting is really beautiful depending on what it is. And then when you're out, when I'm out shooting with natural light, I'm looking for the light as well as the texture. So I'm trying to, if I'm going on a texture walk or I'm going to go out and purposefully really look for beautiful texture, I'm also looking at where the light is going to enhance it. So they go hand in hand.
So far, it seems to me that you've described texture as subject. Texture is your subject in these photographs and techniques you've been discussing. For me, texture it plays an entirely supporting role. I often add it from a library of textures that I have. I recently did some still lifes, flowers, where I added texture. I just wondered what your view is on that. Do you find that you do that? Does it play a role in your photography? To what extent does texture play a supporting role in your photography rather than a featured role?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm going to talk about adding textures here in the editing section because absolutely you can. What I want to convey in the first part is there's actually a whole genre of actually shooting to express the texture in the subject and make it the subject of what you're shooting. And it can be really fun and beautiful. So when I teach live classes on texture, or when I've covered this in some of my other courses, what I encourage students to do is actually go out on a photo walk, and all you're going to do is try to shoot for texture. You're not thinking about your subject. And I can promise you it is a very hard activity because you're going to be thinking, oh, that's beautiful, or that's, but it's very challenging to shoot texture as the subject and to think about it. But if you do it, and if you spend a couple hours out in nature somewhere, or maybe pull items around your house, it is going to help your eye so much. It is such a valuable experience. It's going to help you when you're out shooting, maybe just a landscape scene or something else, or when you are editing. So it's a really good process. And I created and have taught a program for a couple years. I may have shared with you guys in the past. It's called A Year of Creative Photography. And one entire month we devote to texture. We devote to shooting textures as well as adding textures like Vernon, you were talking about. And every single student, I've had 60 people in the course each year, have just been like, wow, I didn't realize how hard this was. And I didn't realize how much it would impact my photography, to think about the quality of texture and how it brings out things in your subject and can really enhance your images. So I would encourage you to do both, and then we can absolutely talk about adding it after the fact. Yeah. So continue to think through any questions, and I'm going to jump into this editing section. So when you edit a true just texture image where it's the subject, or an image that has high texture in it, whatever that might be, maybe it's a field of cactus, or something like that, or a building that's got something interesting texture. Of course, contrast. I don't use a lot of contrast, almost never ever, except when I want to bring out texture or with my intentional camera movement images. Contrast can make your images dark, and so I use it very sparingly, but it is a tool to use with texture photography. Of course, adding some clarity can also increase and add a little bit more depth. And then you can adjust your shadows and blacks to add more drama if you want, a more dramatic look. Of course, making sure that you don't expose those or have those clipped at all. Adding a vignette can be nice using graduated filters. And the tone curve is a great tool as well to really adjust. So this image was backlit. And, you know, again, it was the dead of winter and doing a photo walk, beautiful light. And it was just highlighting, you know, this random stick and all the beautiful texture. So you can also add textures to an image to give it a finished look. So this image, these little seed pods, of course, are everywhere around here in the winter, and they're beautiful to capture, especially when they're backlit. And I've captured them with great detail. This one is softer. I shot it with probably, I think, as I remember, it was my Lens Baby, a really softer lens. And it was gorgeous golden light behind it, but I did enhance it with a golden texture around it. So if I enlarge it, there is a texture on that and an oil paint. So that is a fun way. So you can make your own textures. What is fun to do is when you're out shooting and maybe you shoot a brick painted wall or some stone, you can actually take these images into Photoshop or a program like Photoshop, and you can blur them to create your own textures. So these 3 solid color images are all textures that I created from the textures that I shot. And so they're just really soft. I did a heavy blur on them and can use them on my own images. You could also use this stone image at a low opacity and maybe blend it on a certain image. I've done a lot of composite images where I will add a lot of texture to them and use things like this to bring that detail out. So when you create your own textures, you want to choose an image with high texture, contrast, detail, and then you can blur the image. In Photoshop, you can go to Filter Blur and select a blur that you want to use. Some of the ones I like are actually Surface Blur, works really nice. You can do Box Blur is one of my favorites because it gives you a little bit of lines on the texture. And then of course you can change the opacity and blend modes and things to create your own texture. You can also purchase textures. So I have quite a collection. I've decided I need to stop buying them. They can be a little addictive, but I do like to add them from time to time. I don't use them a whole lot. There are times where I use them more than others, but it is a fun way to enhance your background and of your image. So this is an image where I didn't do a total focus stack like 50 images, but I did try to shoot to get more detail, and then I did bring out some of the lines and enhanced it using Topaz Studio 2, which does have a feature where it pops the lines around your subject, and so that's a fun way to edit when you're shooting textured items. So again, I mentioned to you the texture walk, just taking that walk to get out and capture those textures, and it's fun to do. You can also do it just with your iPhone, or cell phone. If you're going to be going out to maybe walk your neighborhood, or you're going somewhere where you can just think about textures and shoot as many as you can, and then think about the images and look at them, see what you like about them, and think about maybe how you could have captured it with a different composition. And it's just going to help you be more attuned to things that are out there. So 10 different ways to capture texture. Again, think about emphasizing the patterns. So just a simple acorn, and how can I compose this? Think about the light to emphasize patterns. If you think about sunflowers, there's still some blooming out there. Plants are great with patterns. How can you really bring that detail out? We've already talked about some of these. Another is shooting a same subject in different light. So if you have things in your garden or yard, think about looking at the texture in the morning versus the evening and how it shifts, maybe how you can compose that. Of course, leading lines are great. multiple exposure, and then adding texture to an image in editing is just a fun way to make your image really unique and stand out. So that's a little bit about texture. I can absolutely answer any other questions about editing. I also think I still have Photoshop and Lightroom up. So if you want me to demonstrate anything, I'll be glad to. So I can just turn it over now to any questions.
I love the idea if you would show us blur, for instance, how you take something into blur in Photoshop.
Yeah, so let's go to, let me think here. Let me go to Lightroom. And
was it Lightroom, Lori, or Photoshop that you do the blur?
It's Photoshop, but I need to bring an image in because I have all my images in Lightroom. So I always start here.
Okay.
And I'm going to go to my texture. Let me go to ICM and see if I've got something here might work. Okay, so let's just take this. I want to take one of these, or maybe this flower. Well, we'll just play with one of these. Edit in Photoshop. And let me go back for just a second. I just saw the folder I was looking for. Oh, you can't see my screen. Hang on. I needed to share everything and I didn't. All right, now can you see my Lightroom?
Yes.
Okay. So let me go to this folder. These are just, this one might be fun as well. Let's see. Edit in Photoshop. And let me go back. All kinds of texture images. Here they are. I knew I had these bricks. Okay, so this will help too because I can show you. This is in my texture file. And let's do a different one. See, that was just a snapshot. I think that was with my iPhone. It doesn't even have to be a, a great shot. Okay, so I'm going to go over to Photoshop and we've got plenty to work with now. And let's go over and I'll start with this image. So I always duplicate my background and filter, and I'm going to do blur, and let's start with a box blur. And with box blur, you know, I could, you could decide how much of the lines you want to keep in your texture. You could take the blur all the way up. So maybe if I started right there. Now I could duplicate that so that I've got it. And then the other thing I can do is check your image mode. We want to be on the 8 bits channel. And now I can go to filter artistic, or I could come down to texture actually. And let's go to texturizer. And I can add even more texture to it. So you've got all these options, but you have to make sure you're on 8-bit. So, you know, there's just tons of options. Under texturizer, you can do burlap, you can do brick, So this is another way to make your own. And when you layer this over an image, you're not going to see necessarily all this pattern, but it's just giving you that extra texture to it. And once you're done, you can click OK. And so then I could use this. Let me just see what it looks like over. I'm just going to move it over this image for the fun of it, just to see. And I'm going to transform it. And let's just reduce. So it's adding a little yellow glow. I wouldn't necessarily use it with this image, but I just wanted you to see it. I could change the blend mode, maybe do soft light, which actually isn't bad. It's giving it a nice little yellow glow. So before and after. So when you think about adding textures to an image, it's not just the actual feel of it, but you're also looking at the colors. So you do have to think about the colors, but that would be how one way to create it. Now, if I go to this image, I'm going to go ahead and start by duplicating and filter blur. For this one, let's try the surface blur. And I'm going to take the radius. You kind of just have to play with it and see how much of it. There we go. That's kind of interesting. This could be really fun to apply over like a barn scene or something where you're wanting to add some fun color and texture. A lot of times when we add a texture over an image, it's more for the color tones and maybe some of the texture details. I will show you in just a minute. I can pull up some images where I've added texture for the purpose of truly bringing out texture in the image. And then this one I did multiple ways. So you could also do a motion blur. So a motion blur, you can do different directions. So that can be really interesting. And you can also kind of like it like that. You can apply multiple. So let's say, oh, I like it like that. Let's do that one. And then I'm going to come and duplicate that, and I'm going to do another blur. So you can just kind of play with them and keep adding them. I always duplicate the layer though, so if I don't, I can turn it on and off if I don't like it. So let's do a box blur on top of it, but we're just going to keep it really soft. And so, you know, you could decide, okay, that's something that I want, but I also like that one. So what I do, and what I did with this image is I just kept duplicating it, and I had several versions, and then I can save these out. So I can export this way. I can turn this off and I can export it this way. And so this is one that in my course, I actually give the students 6 versions of this brick wall with different ways of applying and making it a texture. So you could just continue to kind of, you know, duplicate and play with it. Let me turn these off. And we could also do, Gaussian blur is nice, but it's really subtle. So I usually, if I'm going to create one, I do something a little different. You can do a radial. Sometimes a zoom or a spin can work. And that did okay. It's probably not enough, but I could go and continue to kind of work with it. There's spin blurs, and you know, you can play with those and kind of decide how much of it you want. So they're just all kinds of options. I'm going to cancel this because it can take forever to process. See if I can get it to stop. Yeah, and remember, you can always change the opacity. If you don't want it at 100%, you can bring back some of those other details. So that one also is pretty. So you could actually have, you know, the 100% version. I could duplicate this, turn off these others, and maybe I want to just take it down and have this one underneath. So that's the beauty of Photoshop and layers, is just play. You could also change the color tones. So if I didn't want this red, I could do a selective color adjustment. I could reduce the kind of orange red tones. I could paint over this. So, you know, all kinds of options there. What other,
That was great, Lori. Thank you so much.
oh, you're welcome. Good. I wanted to see if I could find this other images I was going to show you. Yeah, so you'll see I've got a lot of these stone and brick walls, and I purposefully shoot these. This was all a group of granite when I was in Glacier on a hike. I would just shoot the various different tones, and I've used this as a granite texture, and it just turned out beautiful because of the kind of blue color and all the just variations in it. So it's fun to just add your own set, and I just have this folder full of different textures. This was a street grade, and it also made a really nice nice texture. So I want to see if I can find these other images to show you, but I may have to go to I may have to go to my website real quick. I'll pull that up. Does anybody else have a question while I pull this up to show you one other thing?
I did have a rather obvious question. Does the texture slider in Lightroom play any role in your textures?
Oh, yeah. So I will definitely use that to kind of bump it up. But I really find if you've taken a shot close up of a subject of texture, then the usually you don't need to use that slider much. I usually use just a little bit of that contrast.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah. Let's see. Anyone else? I'm pulling up a couple images I wanted to show you based on some of your questions. I gotta get logged in here. Okay, I'll share my screen now and show you. So since you guys were interested in thinking about adding textures, I don't have these right now up on my site, but I used to do a lot more digital painting. And so this is where I've added texture. Now, these are composites where this is a historic building out at Manassas Battlefield. Monocacy, not Manassas, Monocacy Battlefield. And of course, I've enhanced the sky. It was a snowy day. There was snow on the ground when I took the picture, but I've enhanced it and used painting, which you can also do in Photoshop, and you can also do on other applications to enhance and bring out textures in the image. This is one where I used various painting apps to bring out detail. I love making these little composites. These are some though where I've added actual texture. So added texture to the sky. I brought out the textures in the building of the old barns and around it. And just, you know, a lot of fun. This was up in Bucks County. I just love to capture all these just deteriorated buildings and try to bring them a little bit back to life. And again, adding lots of texture. This was a composite. This was a little building in a park in Bucks County, and it was in fall, but I just added more leaves, really popped the texture on this building. So this is what it looked like, but I just brought out, you know, all that detail. So that's another fun way to enhance. So this texture added to the sky, texture added, the brick was real. I mean, this kind of pattern on the silo, but just enhancing it. And then sometimes, let's see if I have one in here. I don't know that I have one in here. I have done some where I actually, I'm applying, you know, very abstract, more abstract looking composites where there's multiple layers all together. I was hoping I had, this one has a lot of layers to it. So that's another creative way to use textures.
Lori, can I ask a question about something you showed us with a silo? So you added birds and you added something on the silo. I'm just learning how to composite in Photoshop. How did you get the birds where you wanted them and the different texture on that right-hand silo separately? How did you do that?
Yeah, so this it was painted like this. I just enhanced the colors and did add some additional texture to it. So I just mask it on. The birds is through an app called, it is an iPad or I think they have a cell phone, they do have a cell phone version. It's called Distressed FX. And it's my absolute favorite for adding textures. I will finish an image and then go play with it. I used to have an iPad. I need a new one because it was so much fun to use their program. They have beautiful textures and they have beautiful, fun birds. And it's like 99 cents. It's a nothing app. And I follow and have worked with several other photographers that do a lot of composite work, and they love Distressed FX. Yeah.
Okay, great. But masking that I don't know how to do yet, that's the solution to a whole lot, right?
Oh yeah, you have to be able to come in and let's say I'm going to add that texture here, and you know, I only want it on a certain place. I've got to add a mask. Well, here's an example, perfect example. I did add this texture. This is a mask, so I mask it off. If I didn't have the mask, so if I disable it, there's the texture and it's covered. So I brought the opacity down, but then I needed to mask it off. You can also mask on. So let's delete that mask and let's take this up. And let's say I wanted to just put, I can invert the mask, and now with a white brush, I can apply that texture where I want it. And so that's what I did with the silos is I'll bring a texture in and I'll paint it where I want it to enhance, and then I'll adjust the opacity. You can also adjust the saturation, you can tweak the colors, but you're applying it where you want it. Yeah, and I was really hoping I could show you guys, I don't know why Photoshop is not the friendliest to go back and find things, and it looks like it's oh good, maybe here they are. I was going to try to show you one with the layers. Here's I try to keep these for when I'm teaching. So this this image, it doesn't have all of it, but this was a shot in Maine. And then I have added multiple different kinds of textures. This is not the full file, so I don't think, yeah, I can't show you all of this, but there are multiple different textures in here. It was a huge file. Let me see if it'll open this one. This is an abstract that was part of a project that I had to do for a photography/art class. And I'm not sure if this one has all the files either. No, it doesn't either, but this is a composite. So it is a combination. You can see this tile pattern, and that was a texture that was added. There's texture up here. There's about 6 different textures layered, and then the flowers added. It was a huge layered file, but to do that, yeah, you have to be able to layer and mask. Yeah. And actually just did a YouTube video on masking. So if you go to YouTube and search me, I do have a channel, and I just started a Photoshop series, and I have a whole short basic one on masking.
Thank you.
Yeah, so adding textures and you know, whether it's composites. Okay, so this is a full this was not the finished product, but you can just see the stack of, you know, this is where I added this texture, and it's been masked. I label it so I know that I added it to the foreground lighting. I added sky up here. So there was a whole lot done to work on this image. And I do try to label them as I go, because otherwise you get really confused. Anything else that I can answer? Well, I hope we gave you guys some ideas and inspiration, and it's definitely this season to get out and think about how to add and enhance your images using textures.
Well, thank you, Lori. I mean, you really had, you always give us a lot to think about, a lot of interesting techniques.
Absolutely. Thank
Yes,
you.
indeed. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Well, I do have a few spots open if anybody wants to join me at Brookside out in Maryland in October. The information's on my website, and got some other things coming up. I'm doing a Lightroom library and Lightroom class. So would love to have any of you join if any of that works, and reach out anytime. I'm glad to be back with you guys tonight.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much, Lori.
Thanks. Good night.